You asked me, what was it? How did this start? When do I do lending?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're doing so much of this.
So this whole thing started out as an idea of ways to generate value for real estate agents because the majority of my business is referral business from real estate agents. I used to, for the first 10 years of my career, do things consumer direct, meaning I was going after buyers or people who were trying to refinance. And the issue that I ran into when you go consumer direct is that I was losing a lot of the transactions through the real estate agents that had already had relationships with lenders, or the individual who calls a lender first, unfortunately, is basically just price shopping and sees no value in service or anything along those lines. So I realized, I wouldn't say early on, but I realized about halfway through my career that consumer direct was not like the best way for me to do things, because I started off in the refinance space where that's all consumer direct because there's no real estate agent or any other people in the transaction because they already own a home. So when I identified that I kind of wanted to get more involved in like the feel good, we bought a home. I identified quickly that going consumer direct on something like that wasn't going to be best practices. So for a while there, in many different markets, because I've been doing this for I've been in the business for 26 years. I've been licensed for 22. And so when I looked at it and said, okay, throughout different markets, there were different ways that we were presenting value to real estate agents. But since things have been slow and it is just a different market, it was like, okay, how do we generate value to real estate agents? And truthfully, right now, it's harder than it has been in a while. There's still things we can do. But a lot of it, what we used to do in the past was like we would lead with education, we would lead with sales training, a lot of these things that would be of value to agents in markets where they had clients, when right now they're like, that's all great that I'm learning all of these things, or that, the networking or the multiple things that we've done, they're like, I don't have any business to give you, right? So unless you're going to just legitimately give me a lead, I don't know what to tell you. Of course, they didn't come right out and say that, but that was really what that was the problem to solve. So I thought about it and I thought, okay, how do we generate value with these clients? And the reality was that I noticed that a lot of agents that were good, they were really pumping up their social media presence. They were generating a lot of consumer direct marketing so that they could go after consumers, because most people, probably, again, not best practices, but most people, when they think about buying a home, the first thing they want to do is they want to look at homes first and then figure out whether or not they can afford it. So I thought, okay, how can I create a way to help agents with their social media presence without just like paying someone like a flash media marketing? And how can I create kind of an experience that could maybe cultivate into a relationship? So doing the podcasting was just that, right? I'm kind of attacking a couple different things, couple different facets, right? Like first and foremost, we're having a conversation, we're getting to know one another, we're in person. I think from a psychological standpoint, you can understand the value in that. And then the second piece of it was by recording it, what I hoped for and what I can say now with confidence was that we were seeing people organically tell their stories. They weren't sitting in front of a camera, answering questions. And so the clips came across very organic, which was what we wanted, right? Instead of saying like, hey, I'm Fabi, here's what I do. It was genuine conversations. And so my whole thing behind it was, as a real estate agent, when you're being referred by other people, most people, the very first thing that they're going to do is they're going to get on the internet, search that individual's name, and they're going to get a feel for who that person is, typically before they even call. And as much as we maybe want to ignore or deny this, the reality is that when you see somebody in an organic form speaking about themselves or their business, when it's done right with good audio, good video, you almost get a sense of who that person is without even ever having to meet them or talk to them, which unfortunately in sales is exactly what a lot of clients want to do. one of the biggest compliments I ever got was after doing this for a while, I had a client contact me and said, hey, I was referred to you by, insert whoever realtor it was. And I went into kind of thing, thanks for calling. Did so-and-so explain why we work together? And they said, we actually just watched like 2 or 3 of your podcasts. Like, we love you. You don't even have to like sell us. And so with that has been the value add that we've been trying to produce to real estate agents. And then we've been, once we started kind of focusing it just on agents, I identified very quickly that real estate agents are self-employed business owners. Because a lot of the conversations organically went to, what are you doing as an agent to generate new business? What are your pain points with your clients? What are things that you wish your clients knew if you could put out a public service announcement? And I went, boy, this is like a lot of the same similar pain points that business owners are having. So then I started inviting people that are in the trades, title, insurance. Ultimately, anyone who is a small business owner became really good guests, because then people who were listening to this from the real estate side of things can also listen to it from an entrepreneurial side of things. So there is the how it all cultivated. When do I find time to do mortgages? I mean, this really is just the networking part of my job. I think any lender or business owner sets aside time for networking and getting to know people. So when I first started this, my goal was to do 5 podcasts a week. Now I try to just do like 1 or 2 a week. So for example, this week we'll have 3 of them. And it's kind of a busy week for me, but that's only 3 hours. The editing, as I said, I've gotten pretty quick at it, and I don't have kids. So that's the real hack.
So I should get rid of my kids.
I did not say that. I just said that when people ask me, how do I find time for things? I am, as an outsider looking in, children can take up a lot of time. And I have a lot of time for other things because of the fact that I don't have children.
Yeah, that works. And your podcasts are typically an hour long?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who the guest is. Typically try to keep them around an hour. Organically, I feel like that's usually how they end up. But there are definitely instances where we get guests and things kind of, in a good way, can take a turn about other topics and stuff like that. So we've done podcasts that have gone as long as 3 hours. But I'd say the average guest is anywhere between an hour and an hour and a half.
Yeah. Any topics that you steer away from?
The only thing that I typically try not to talk about on here is politics. Otherwise, people go, well, what about religion? I go, I love it. Let's go. Otherwise, no, everything's good to go. You can swear on here. People ask me, they're like, can we swear on this podcast? Someone will like say a swear word and go, we're going to cut that out. Like, don't worry about it. This is going out to adults only. So, yeah, there now you have the history of the podcast. Like I said, 2 years, July 7th, and you are around episode 175.
So cool.
You like that?
Yeah.
Can you bring that mic a little bit closer to you? It moves. We want to hear your beautiful voice. So
Okay.
Fabi or Fabianna.
Either one.
What's the last name?
Labby.
Say it again.
Labby.
Labby. And so a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you do. And basically, if you could just mirror exactly how I described the podcast, but make it about your business, I want to hear all about it.
Wow. If we go way, way back, my father now is retired, but he was a physician
Okay.
and super passionate about his work. And when I was little and people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say I want to be a doctor just like my daddy. And then I grew up and realized that that would involve blood and going to medical school
Right.
and all of that, and that wasn't for me. And found psychology in college and when I graduated, didn't want to get a job. So I thought, well, I'll just go to grad school.
Okay.
So I applied to grad school, and I was just talking about this yesterday. I feel incredibly fortunate that it worked out because I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. The first moment when I was in the room with a client. I was still a grad student, totally green, was at Austin State Hospital with a 10-year-old, I think, if I remember correctly. I knew I was in the right place. And it was like, I never looked back. So the trajectory, I guess, all through grad school was trying to figure out sort of the best place for me to apply this passion. And by the way, going back to being a doctor like my daddy, what I discovered is that it wasn't really the doctor part.
Okay.
Although I have a doctorate, so
Right.
I am. But it was the passion. It was the passion that he had for his work. When he talked about his work, he would light up. He also was super involved in teaching students because in Houston, the medical schools are right there. And I've had the good fortune of being able to supervise grad students. So all of the things that I think enabled him to have that passion for what he did, I've incorporated into what I do. And I feel just incredibly fortunate to do what I do and not feel like I go to work every day.
Yeah. I think that's what everybody hopes for.
Yeah. So I lucked into it.
Lucky you.
And I've spent the last 30 years doing it and don't see myself stopping.
So after grad school, and then how did we monetize this? How did the business start?
That's been the hardest part for me.
Okay.
So in the doctoral programs in psychology, you do coursework, and then before you graduate, you do a full year internship, which is basically a full-time job. It's the equivalent of what doctors do after med school. They do like a residency. For us, it's a year, and it's before we graduate. So I was on internship and getting paid to do what I do, and I spent a good chunk of time in my supervision talking about the guilt that I felt getting paid to do what I do.
Interesting.
Because if I could, I'd do it for free. Where I landed in that year is that I was getting paid to do the paperwork because I don't like the paperwork.
Where was your internship at?
University of Florida.
Okay.
Counseling Center.
And what type of psychology were they mainly focused on? Was it adults? Was it children?
We were working with college students.
Okay.
At the time, that was my life plan. I was at UT for part of my graduate career and worked at the counseling center at UT and loved working with college students, mostly because I understood them. I was just fresh out of college.
Right.
And then finished up my graduate work in Florida and did a lot of counseling center work and just really loved that population. There's so much going on when a college kid leaves home. They're dealing with being away from home for the first time, living independently for the first time. All of the emotional stuff that goes along with that it's just so rich. It's an incredibly rich time in anyone's life. And to be able to be part of that journey, the adjustment to not just to school, but to adulthood and independence it's hard to match it.
Were those the conversations mainly with a lot of those clients?
Yeah,
kind
a lot of
those
it
topics?
was adjustment to living on their own, managing their own time, their own schedule, separation from parents, which is the developmental task at that age. A lot of trauma gets worked through at that time because you take somebody out of their home environment and they think about things in a different way. Funny story, I guess, my own college experience. My parents are from Argentina.
Oh, wow.
All of their friends were from Argentina. And so when I was a freshman in college, we had a suite with a shared telephone. There were no cell phones at that time.
Sure.
I came up in the dark ages. And one of my suite mates said, "Fabi, there's a phone call for you." And I said, "Who is it?" And she said, "I don't know. They have an accent." And I get on the phone. It was my mom. And I'm like, "Accent? My mom doesn't have an accent. My point of reference was
Yeah.
totally different, right? I don't know why I thought that was relevant to what I was talking about. It was, but
Well, it was about you leaving and being away, and now you're getting a phone call from your
so
mother.
yeah, so when you're in the environment,
Yeah.
Thank you. There was no accent. I didn't become aware of the otherness of my parents until I was away from home and seeing my family through the eyes of other people. And that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
That's how we become aware of dynamics that maybe aren't healthy or don't resonate, or we want to change them. So it's kind of an exciting time. The other really nice thing about it is that the students, I mean, you pay a student service fee or a health fee, but they're not paying for the service. So
Right.
they show up really because they want to be there. And college students are awesome. You say, show up at 3 o'clock on Monday, and they're there. They never no-show. They're reliable.
That's great.
It was a lot of fun.
So that's where you cut your teeth.
Cut my teeth. Since then, I've done a little bit of everything. I worked with children and families, did some CPS work. That's probably the hardest work I've ever done. Also very gratifying, but you put a lot of yourself into it.
Right. Can imagine.
What else have I done? Juvenile sex offenders. That was actually probably the most gratifying work I ever did.
Oh, wow. Why is that?
Because you're working with families. We tend to think of, when I started that job, I had worked with a lot of victims of sexual abuse, and I thought, there's no way. I even said this in the interview to the man who became my boss. I said, I'm not going to be able to connect empathically with these people. I have it on the side of the victim. I get what that's like. I don't think I'll be able to connect with the offender. But the reality is, when you're working with a 12, 13-year-old who's been accused of touching a cousin or their sibling, and you get into their story with them, they're still kids.
Right.
And most of them were kids who grew up in very restrictive environments where it wasn't okay to talk about sex, it wasn't okay to ask questions. And you hit puberty and you don't feel like you can talk about it. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? And it's not to excuse the behavior. I'm not
Sure,
saying
no, I get it.
it's not hurtful, it's not harmful. But for most of the kids that we worked with, they needed education. The family needed education. They needed to know it was okay to talk about things that are happening in your body. So I learned a ton. I worked in that job for 2 years. I learned a ton. Psychiatric hospitals, substance abuse. I've done it all. Nursing homes.
And what did you kind of land on? I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years. You got to have some sort of idea of, for lack of a better term, a preference.
So the longer I do this, I've always been fascinated by dynamics between people. So if I had to say my specialty, I would describe myself as a relationship therapist.
Got it. But to clarify, that's relationships between any two people, not
any
just,
two people.
not like
Yeah.
not just exclusively romantic or anything, right?
Parent-child, siblings, all of it.
Sure.
In my graduate program, had, again, the good fortune to take classes in couples therapy, family therapy, and I'm super passionate about that kind of work. Early on, the focus was really on working with couples and doing couples work with romantic partners.
Yep.
The longer I do the work, the more convinced I am that I need more than one person in the room. Individual
Interesting.
therapy is great, but most people go to therapy, if you've ever been in therapy, because they're not happy with their relationships.
Sure. And it's almost too late.
And when I have an individual in my office, they're not wrong, but they're bringing their perception of how they show up in relationships. And I can work with that, but there's a limit to how far we can get, because other than how they're interacting with me, where there's no tension at all because the entire focus is on them, they, you hit a wall at some point. If I bring a partner in, or right now I'm doing a lot of group therapy and trying to build that part of my practice, then I can see how they're interacting. I don't just rely on and then I can see where their perception is accurate and where they might need some education about how things aren't quite working. So by adding a partner or a parent or a child or a sibling or whoever it is in the room, it adds depth and richness to the work. So my focus now, as I sort of move into what feels like the next phase of my practice, is to focus on couples work, group therapy. My latest thing is siblings, adult siblings. As our parents get older and we have to re-engage with our siblings in a very different capacity, right? To make decisions about what to do about dad's care. Do we take him to assisted living? Do we help him live at home? Those are really difficult decisions, and interacting with our siblings reignites old family patterns of behavior. So that's my latest thing. This is my new brainchild, is to bring in adult siblings to work on breaking those family patterns.
I like it. The thing for me is, for the record, I've done quite a bit of therapy early. I used to be a different person in my late teens, early 20s, and my therapy started as being court ordered, and I kind of took it from there, and I go on and off. But I could say that there's been some form of therapy in my life for over 20 years. And I really like the idea of bringing in other people outside of like the couple, because from my experience, and then just based on conversations that I've had with other couples who have sought therapy, and this is just my opinion, right, which really isn't worth much. I have no degrees or anything like that, but
20 years is an education in and of itself.
A little bit. I've always seen that there's been difficulty in couples therapy if the individuals themselves aren't okay with themselves, if that makes sense. So as an example, I've seen people that, and again, I'm not a doctor and I'm not qualified to diagnose anybody of anything, but I've seen people that have gone to couples therapy when I know just on the surface of things that these individuals individually are not right with themselves. And so going into a couples therapy, I cannot imagine how that's going to turn out. And you hear the failure stories, right? And I try to insert myself if it's only valuable, but there are definitely times when I've seen couples that are going to couples therapy. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, y'all need to be going to like therapy on your own individually first. And then maybe then you won't even need couples therapy, or only at that point have you graduated to a couples therapy per se. And then these, I'm at the age now where I'm 41 years old. A lot of these people, I don't know if there's a statistic for this, but I feel like you get married in your late 20s, and if it's not going to work out, it typically, starts to fizzle out 8 to 10 years later. So I'm seeing a lot of people who did the therapy, it didn't work, and again, going back to what I mentioned, is I feel like if they were willing to do therapy on their own first, that there may have been a higher success rate. But then to hear what you're saying as a therapist, I can totally see how dealing with an individual, it's easier. You're getting kind of one facet of who that person is. And instead of bringing in the partner, the romantic partner, why not have like the mother or a sister or anyone to, kind of come in and create an additional dialogue for you to, for lack of a better term, diagnose. I love that. I've never even heard of that. I think that's really great. Because again, that whole couples thing, it shocks me the amount of people that would entertain couples therapy that would not entertain individual therapy. I've also seen a lot of that.
There's a certain amount of self-awareness that you have to have to be able to do therapy with somebody else in the room.
Okay.
I think what you're talking about is that not 90% of the time, but I'd say maybe 70% of the time when people come to couples therapy, the unspoken agenda is we're here because they need the help. So when people go to
So for like
couples,
someone's trying to get validation.
or they're not seeing the problem from that they're contributing
Right.
to, right? They see the dynamic, but they think
know
it's
it's
all
off.
it's all. So they come to therapy and say, part of the reason I stopped doing therapy with children is when parents plunk a child in the therapy room and say, "Fix my child."
Yeah.
I'm like, your child's not broken. Let's take a look
Sure.
at where they came from.
Right. What you reap is what you sow.
So, yeah, and what you're talking about, when somebody comes in with a parent or a sibling, we tend to show up in all relationships in pretty much the same way.
Right.
I
That's
mean,
why I said I love that. I've never even heard
the
of that.
romantic piece is kind of,
Yeah.
the what makes the
Right.
romantic relationship
Sure.
different, obviously.
But the building blocks are there.
Can we talk about sex?
We can talk about sex. Sure.
So yeah, and group therapy is super effective, right? Because when you put people in any group, we recreate our family dynamics, especially when there's a resource that we're fighting for. So
Right.
in the case of group therapy, it's the therapist's attention or the attention of somebody else in the room.
Or right fighting.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a great opportunity to work on those old patterns and do them differently. I think my favorite success story really is a middle child who came to individual therapy to break patterns of being the peacekeeper and started group, and in group became aware of what she was doing when she was doing it, and then asked the group for help, to stop doing it.
Yeah.
And then that translates. It's sort of like a dress rehearsal or a live lab, if you think about it in that
Yeah.
way, to do things differently out in the world, and then you come back and with people that you develop a trusting relationship with, can work out the kinks.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said with the whole, we're here because we need to fix the spouse. Doesn't matter, husband or wife. Because I guess when I reflect back on some of the people that I'm thinking of in my personal life, it was like the one person was there because they thought they needed it.
Absolutely.
Not that we needed it. We knew it was broken. And the other one kind of goes almost based on like an ultimatum. And that's kind of to my, do you ever find that, and this is directed towards you and other couples therapists that do you find that when people come in for couples therapy that you also kind of suggest that they see therapists individually?
Sometimes. The way I think about it, because of what we're talking about, is that the beginning of any therapy really is me educating my clients on how to be good clients.
Okay.
So when a couple comes in,
Yeah, I was gonna
if
say.
I have a sense that there's that imbalance, that one person's driving we're here in therapy because she wants us to be here,
Right.
and she's in therapy because he's the problem,
Right.
or vice versa. My job is to educate them as to how we can do this, and we can pretend like he's the problem and that you're over here smelling like roses, but it takes two people. And until both people are willing to look at what they're bringing, it doesn't.
What do you
doesn't
think the
work.
success ratios are, not just for you, but in general with couples therapy when it comes to intimate relationships?
It's pretty low.
Yeah.
Couples therapy, it's hard to do. It's really, really hard to be a client in couples therapy.
Yeah, I was a part of it for two different therapists, and it was very difficult. And then finally, after my second one, our therapist basically said, like, this is just not going to work. And I continued to see her. She wrote a book and became famous. I don't know if you've ever heard of Susan Fee. Yeah, she moved to the Pacific Northwest, but I was introduced to her through what was now my ex-wife, but I saw her for about a year and a half after, just continued to do the work. It was awesome. I really miss her. And she passed me off to someone I didn't like.
That happens.
Yeah, I don't blame her.
The rebound therapist.
Yeah, I had a rebound therapist, and then, ironically enough, I ended up moving close to someone that I made friends with, who is a child psychologist, and I basically had a very similar conversation to the one that you and I are having, and she introduced me to somebody who was a really good fit for a while, and I even was continuing to see her when I would go back up to Cleveland, because that's where I'm originally from, but I've been pretty good lately. I've been good.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just is like anything, you know. I encourage everybody, you know, if you've ever been to like the analogy I give is having a personal trainer in the gym. I think is great. Even if if you've never had one, you should do it, because after like 6 months to a year, you kind of learn some tips and tricks and workouts and things like that. And if that trainer's doing a good enough job, like you can replicate that, and you can go back to some of the exercises and routines and everything along those lines that trainer taught you. And I've just had, you know, maybe it's luck, maybe I just have a good memory, but the ability to kind of like fall back on my training. But again, you know, 20 years, there's definitely been a few times where it's like, okay, I need to learn some new tricks. And never afraid to make that call or put in the work.
There's something about being in relation to somebody who sees you through a different lens, right? Even if you know yourself really well, the hopefully objectivity. I mean, I'm not sure how objective we can be, because the therapy relationship is still a relationship.
True.
Right. And I still bring my stuff into the room, so I have to be aware of that.
Yeah.
But sometimes just having that outsider's bird's eye view of what we're doing is enough to write the course.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the coolest things that's happened, I've been doing this work now for a long time, is that the stigma that's associated with therapy is really going away. And what I'm seeing in younger people who are coming to therapy is that they do see it as self-care, like going to the gym. So it dramatically changes the ability that we therapists have to make a difference, because we don't have to break through any of that discomfort. It's a remarkable thing, right? When somebody comes to you, and I had a couple come to me, they were thinking about getting pregnant, and they wanted to work on whatever potential problems might come up.
So like proactive. I think that's good.
Being proactive in that way it's really remarkable. When as a therapist, the first time I encountered it, I was like, I don't know what to do here, right? Because it's not what
we talk about that in
think
finance. We talk about that a lot in finance, where individuals will, they'll be buying a home together and they don't necessarily know anything about each other's finances. They've kind of kept them separate. And it's like, if y'all are going to continue with this, it's kind of imperative that you're aware of, financial habits and things like that, because it does, I don't need to tell you, money is a big thing in any relationship that can create some serious issues. But I do like that you mentioned that stigma is going away. I think that's a good thing. What I have found from not only my personal experience, but I've seen with others, how many times do you feel like you have someone who comes in, you identify the problem, come up with solutions, but then the action isn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I've been doing it wrong, but I've never been to a therapy session where we're able to identify kind of a pain point and then come up with a solution. I still have to put that into, I have to do the work, right? I have to like make the changes or be more mindful or whatever the solution is. And do you find that you are identifying root problems that people are just going, I'm not going to do anything about?
It's I mean, it's hard to do. It's hard to make the changes. It's part of the reason why, therapy can go on for years.
Right.
I think I have two answers
Okay.
for that. One is that sort of the golden snitch in therapy, if we think about it in that way, that aha moment that
Yeah.
we're after, doesn't happen until there's kind of a coming together of what we know about ourselves and the feelings.
Okay.
And when those click, it's like a puzzle piece that comes together. You have that, oh, so that's why I keep sleeping with the same person over and over and over again, even though it doesn't seem like that's what's happening.
Right.
Once you have that aha moment, then it becomes easy. Because then when you're in whatever the situation is, right? You're on that first date and you're like, oh yeah, this one's just like the one I left.
Yeah.
That self-awareness sort of kicks in a way that makes it easier to make better choices.
Yeah.
That aha moment, that golden snitch, is super elusive.
Interesting.
So that's the goal.
Yeah.
Is to get there.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is that as I get older, and maybe this is just something that comes with age, I find people to be less self-aware year over year over year. And given the opportunity to be self-aware and have I love the term, that golden snitch moment, I have had those moments quite a few times. And the irony is, for me personally, and I don't see this very much with others, is that part of my therapy early on was getting good at being okay with things not being okay. And having those moments and saying, okay, this is why I do this, and identifying the moment, for me personally, 8 out of 10 times, I didn't change my behavior. I just became okay with the way things were. Because it wasn't necessarily that bad. I was just not liking it because I felt like I didn't have control of the situation. And I don't see very many people do that. Or, going back to, okay, you have the aha moment. Going to the gym is great, but you still have to lift the weights.
Yeah.
And so going to your analogy, like, oh, why do I keep sleeping with the same person? Okay, now you've identified it. What are you going to do about it? And if you continue to do this over and over, you either have to be okay with that behavior and go, you know what, this is who I am, this is what I do, and I can't be upset with this, or you have to change. And I unfortunately don't see either one of those things typically when people have that aha moment.
So the second answer to the question, the second part of it, is group therapy.
I see.
Group therapy creates accountability because you're meeting with the same people
Yeah.
week to week. And if you're not seeing the patterns, they will. And if the group therapist does a good job of setting up the safety in the space, they'll call you out on it and challenge you on it. So
Do you find that people maybe sometimes have issues that they think are issues, but they don't really want to change?
absolutely.
What's the why behind that?
Because it's uncomfortable.
Because change is hard.
Change is hard. Change is uncomfortable. And a lot of what you were just talking about, that realization that maybe it is what it is, and I just need to change the way I think about it.
Exactly.
When there are things we don't have control over,
Right.
the harder we work to try and control the uncontrollable, the more miserable we are because we're fighting a losing battle.
Yep.
When we realize that there's no winning this, and I have to find a way to be okay with it, everything changes.
Isn't that called when they find an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object? Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that what that's
Yeah.
called?
Yeah. After my last kid was born, I was getting my hair colored and sitting in the chair, I was like, why am I doing this? I've had gray hair since I was in my mid-20s. And it was to the point that if I was going to truly avoid the gray, I had to sit in that chair for at least an hour and a half, spending a ton of money every 3 weeks. And I thought, I'm not going to do it. I'm done. And when I stopped fighting what was going to happen, no matter what, it felt incredibly freeing.
You're talking to a bald guy.
Well, yeah, but you have a beard.
But the point is I know what you're talking about. I went bald at 19. So,
Okay, so
I
there
could
you
have
go.
done what a lot of these guys do and tried to fluff it around and do what I call fighting the good fight. So I feel you.
Yeah.
I experienced that very early on.
Those are the things that we try to resist because they make us uncomfortable,
Right.
or for whatever reason, right? We're going to resist things that are not changeable. There's
Right.
nothing really we can do, and the fighting causes more problem
Yeah.
behavior than, right? It's that midlife crisis kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Throw away your good life for fast cars, fast women, fast whatever.
It doesn't sound appealing, but I hear you.
Yeah. And it doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't
Right.
work.
It's just regret.
Yeah.
So what else? What else can we uncover about your business? And, we went down a little rabbit hole there about doing the work and couples therapy, which that's really what you've been gearing everything towards. And I really do love the idea of bringing outsiders outside of the couple so that you can kind of get more of a sounding board on the way people are acting with other people in their lives. How long ago was it that you identified that? And was that something that came to you, or was that a suggestion from a book or a class or something like that, or it just happened organically?
So I've always been interested in the dynamics with more people in the space. So anytime I had the opportunity to do couples therapy, family therapy, group therapy, I was there. Where I am now is thinking that that's really what I want my work to look like. So for most therapists, individual therapy is our bread and butter. I'm not going to turn individuals away. But in terms of my networking and marketing, what I'm talking to people about is the sort of multiple people in the room at whatever constellation that looks like. I forgot what you asked me.
Just asking about how the whole couples therapy thing evolved for you, whether that became something you recognized organically or was it something that was suggested to you? Because again, as somebody who has not like I'm, deep in this space, but, through conversations, it's the very first time I've ever really heard of anybody who identified something like that. And spending my fair share of time in couples therapy and individual therapy, I could totally see how that could be of value to the therapist.
So that's where I was going. I've always been intrigued by the dynamics
Right.
when you have more than one person in the room. I think I've said that now a million times.
Yeah, it's all right.
There is a psychiatrist named Irvin Yalom who's brilliant. He's written a lot of really great books, and pick up any of his books. They're all fascinating. He is the sort of the father of the model of group therapy that I use.
Okay.
He has a book that he wrote for beginning therapists. It's basically letters to a therapist. I can't remember the name of the book. In that book, he talks about how we're trained to do individual therapy with just one person, and that it's not okay from a boundaries perspective to bring anybody else in. And he talks about how the longer he did the work, and he's now old, like close to 100 old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he's been doing the work a lot longer than I have. That he started incorporating somebody else into the intake process. So he would meet with the client who came to see him, and then if it made sense, he would invite the partner to just come and give their perspective on what's going on with
Sure.
the person. And that affirmed for me that I was on the right track. So it's not typical. It's not what we typically do, and it's not what we typically think of, but it can be incredibly effective.
Is there a relation that seems to work better than others? In other words, hypothetically, if we have a couple, and just to give description, let's say a man and a woman couple, and you're kind of like, hey, I would really like to bring someone else in just to kind of do more group therapy, get a feel for the way that y'all are interacting. Is there a specific type of person that you feel works better than others, whether it's let's bring in your mother, let's bring in your father, let's bring in your sister? Is there anything that's like doesn't work? Like, let's bring in your best friend.
Sometimes it's just a matter of who's available.
Okay.
So a childhood friend of mine was in therapy and talking about her childhood stuff and her relationship with her parents and all of that fun stuff that we therapists love to talk about. And we grew up together, and I was in her house and had, a relationship with her mother. And she invited me to her therapy to talk about what my perspective was of her childhood. And it was a one-time thing. They asked me a bunch of questions, and then I went on my way.
Did you ever find out if they felt it was fruitful?
We talked about it at the end, that it was helpful. It was helpful for the therapist. It was helpful for my friend.
Interesting.
Because, again, it's that outside perspective.
Of course.
It can be gratifying in the sense that it affirms our experience, but it can also be really eye-opening because it can be a totally different perspective, right? Based on, because it's filtered through our experience. So it doesn't really matter, I don't think, who it is. But that's part of, as I'm talking to somebody, I'm starting to generate ideas of who might be helpful.
Right.
And I haven't incorporated that as a regular part of my therapy, mostly because scheduling can be difficult.
Okay.
But if I want to be more like Urban Yalom,
Yeah.
then
Right on.
that's where I'd be moving.
Couple words I want to ask you about, because you hear about these things a lot. I see it all the time on the internet. I hear it in conversations when people are talking about other people. But as a clinical psychologist, I feel like you are qualified to speak on these terms in depth, and I would just love to hear more about this. What are your thoughts on when people label other people as narcissists or as sociopaths?
So
I saw a little bit of a giggle there.
yeah.
Am I incorrect in that people use those terms pretty...
You just put the soapbox right there for me to stand on.
Please go.
I think it is incredibly fortunate that we have access to all kinds of information. TikTok is not a good place to learn about
Almost anything.
psychopathology.
Okay.
It takes us in school years to learn how to diagnose effectively. The problem is that diagnoses as we have them are a list of symptoms or characteristics.
Okay.
And those characteristics show up, especially when we're in the realm of the personality disorders, the characterological disorders like narcissism,
Sociopathology.
Those characteristics are personality traits. Well, guess what? We all have personality traits.
Right.
So when you look at that list, it's pretty easy to say, oh, got that, check, check, check. If you don't put that into any kind of meaningful context, it's easy to misdiagnose.
Sure.
So again, I think it's part of what is moving the destigmatization of therapy is that we have so much more information. We have access to so much more information than we used to. But one of my biggest pet peeves as a therapist is when somebody comes to me and they say, you know, our couples therapist diagnosed my wife with borderline personality disorder. I'm like, how is that helpful?
Yeah.
How is it helpful? If it's not part of the solution, it's helpful. Those diagnostic codes were created to give professionals a common language to be able to talk to each other about people that we're working with. It's not meant to be I don't know, a lancet that you use
Right.
to say, oh, well, see, I don't have to work on
Yeah.
my relationship problems because I married a narcissist.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't change his behavior, well, there's no hope.
Right. It's not on me.
So I'll kick the soapbox out from under me in just a second, but I think it's a double-edged sword. It's great to have the information, but I don't think that reading a book about narcissism or borderline personality disorder is enough to make that information useful, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, in these terms, the amount that I hear them, and I'm not even in this space, in comparison to the amount of times that you have identified an individual like this, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? How common is it that you run into somebody that is like, had, you know, true borderline personality or narcissist or sociopath? Like, are these things that are fairly common, uncommon?
So all personality, whenever we have like a cluster of characteristics, they are an attempt to cope. Right?
Okay.
If you think about personality as being the way that we interact with other people, or the way we show up in relationships, everything we do is an attempt to cope with discomfort.
Right. So
the more discomfort somebody has in their lifetime, the louder the coping strategies become.
I see.
So it's a matter of degrees, is basically what it is. So we all have traits. We all have characteristics that could be defined or could be included in any one of the diagnoses. It dramatically changes things when you shift from this is something that they're doing to me to, this is a behavior they're doing because they don't feel safe.
Right. So ultimately, if I'm hearing you correctly, these labels are very helpful to psychologists and very dangerous to use between individuals.
Not so much dangerous, it's what we do with them, right?
Right.
It's not like there's a blood test that, you know.
I've just never
if you
seen
think
these
you
terms
have-
used in a positive light. This might be the first time where you kind of gave that description where it almost seems like, oh, wow, okay, like this person's acting this way because of trauma or insecurities that they experience.
They're terrified, they're vulnerable,
And maybe this is something that we could fix.
Absolutely.
And maybe this is the way I read into it, but when I hear these terms and I see them thrown around, it's like a stain.
That's where it becomes a problem.
Like it's
right?
not going away. Like
Right.
this is who this individual is, and they're doing it themselves. It's not something that is through trauma. It is a learned behavior and or just a stain of who they are.
And I think that we tend to ascribe intentionality to the behavior.
Correct.
That there's manipulation or
Well, of
intent
course.
to harm.
He
Now,
or she's a
don't-
narcissist.
Right. I don't
Right?
want to downplay the harm that can be caused
Of course.
when you're in a relationship with somebody that is coping in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It is incredibly painful. So in no way do I want to, make it seem like the person who's experiencing it is overreacting. They're not.
No, of course not. But what I typically find is when individuals are using those terms, they are not saying it with a soft heart in the way that you said, and said, hey, you know, I'm dealing with somebody who I think has borderline personality disorder, and, you know, I feel like here's the reasons why he or she is acting this way, and I hope that this person can find a way to overcome these things that are creating these behaviors.
Well,
That's not usually how
and how incredibly loving and supportive would it be to be the partner,
right?
who can be the sort of the avenue, I
Usually
guess, to
it's
heal.
I'm in pain because this person's a narcissist and everything is happening to me and they're doing it intentionally.
And again, it hurts like hell when you're on
Right.
the receiving end of it.
Of course.
So I don't fault anybody, but it's not like, you know, a blood test to diagnose diabetes. And once you're diagnosed with diabetes, that's it, right? You have to deal with that the rest of your life.
I have a good story for you.
Yeah.
When I was in my late 20s, I used to go on these kind of these I don't know what you would call it, but I would focus on getting really good in good shape, and would go on these like 8 to 10, sometimes even 12-week stints where I would really focus on working out and just, you know, wanting to get jacked, right? So in my late 20s, one time I went to a chiropractor and I showed up and I said, hey, I just wanted to come in for an adjustment. I'm going to come in like every single week. And he goes, okay, well, what's wrong? And I said, well, there's nothing wrong. I said, I just wanted to come in here. I want to stay limber. I want to stay adjusted because I'm going to go on this like 8-week workout spree and, you know, do all of the things. And I'm going to be lifting heavy and I just want to avoid injury. And he said, wow, that's amazing. He goes, you know, the majority of people who come in here, they come in here and they're like doubled over in pain. And I ask them, you know, what's wrong? And they tell me. And I say, what kept you from coming in here, right, sooner? And you know what? Every one of them has the same answer, he says. I go, what's that? He goes, everyone says to me, I have a high pain tolerance. And he says, do you know that there's no true measurement of pain in medicine? And I said, wow, that's wild. And I remember saying to him, I go, I feel like that's a metaphor for life, where here we are talking about, you know, it's extremely painful to experience what it would be like to have somebody who has those traits and everything, when in reality, we don't really know. We really don't know what that pain is like, because what you might consider to be painful if someone were to act a certain way is going to be completely different than the pain that someone would experience if they were to do the exact same thing to the next person and the next person, because there just really is no true measurement of pain. Because I think the saying is the worst thing that ever happened to you is the worst thing that ever happened to you.
Not only that, pain is the body's alarm system that something's not right. So saying you have high pain tolerance just means you're really good at ignoring
Right.
the smoke alarm that's going off in your body.
Yeah, I think
Right?
that we just as people have a way of kind of trying to, you know, measure things, and I use the term, which I did not coin, which is right fighting. I deal with it a lot in my work where, you know, I'll pull someone's credit and they'll have a low credit score and they'll say, well, I don't understand. I pay all my bills. And I say, well, you know, there's this one account on here from, I don't know, Verizon. And, you know, you've got a collection here for $1,500 from Verizon. They go, oh, that's bullshit. And they want to tell me the story. And I stop them and I say, listen, I am sure whatever happened that you got totally screwed over, but here's the reality of the situation. For $1,500, you can have really good credit, or you can have bad credit and be right. Pick one, right? And so going back to the pain thing, I always hear people where someone will tell a story or explain a situation, and I can almost see, and sometimes people just come right out and say it, and there's always the one, well, let me tell you about this one time for me, what someone said to me. And we're always trying to like level or rate each other's levels of pain, right? I've always been intrigued by that.
Yeah. Well, and it's very unique to the experience of the beholder.
Right. Well, that's
Right?
kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I mean, whatever you want to say, the rich girl who gets her keys taken away from her BMW because she got bad grades, like that could be like an earth-shattering moment for her at that time, you know, where the other person who's trying to, you know, just make sure that her parents don't beat her at night, and you hear those two stories and you're like, but you never know what someone else is experiencing.
Right.
You got a trippy job, Fabi.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
The group stuff is what you're trying to focus on more,
And the sibling therapy.
and the sibling
And,
therapy, which that sounds awesome. What's that? I mean, has that started?
I haven't started.
That sounds
I need
really
to get-
terrifying, if you
I need
ask
to
me.
get that on my website. I think that there's a huge need for it. And so I'm excited to see where that goes.
The reason that sounds terrifying to me, and I would love your opinion on this, is do you find that the saying of kind of like, what is it? You can't teach an old dog new tricks type of thing. Is there some, does that have some bones to it?
If I believed that, I couldn't do the work that I do.
Understood.
The thing about siblings is that they're years of ingrained patterns. The reason to do it, the reason I'm thinking of moving in this direction is that when you're going through the challenge of caring for aging parents or dealing with the loss of a parent, the only people that fully understand what you're going through are your siblings,
Yeah.
because they've been in it with you the entire time. So if I can do work that helps bring siblings together to navigate that process together, supporting each other without fighting over whatever, right? Whatever resources there are that are being fought over, that feels really significant.
Well, and imagine being able to kind of set out on what I would consider to be somewhat of a vulnerable time when the relationship is on the right foot. So in other words, what's the very first thing that you have to experience with your parents? The first thing typically is like, okay, their health is starting to deteriorate, right? What are we going to do about their home? Do we have to put them in a, we start with, they're in a 2-story home. Can we get them into a ranch? Then it goes from a ranch, like, where are we going to, do nursing homes? Are we going to do a nursing home? Is someone going to move in? And those decisions, which are very, very difficult, especially when people have their own lives, tackling those sorts of things when a relationship is on better footing is going to be a lot more manageable
For sure.
than if it's like, okay, not only are we not good, but now we have to talk about things that are very uncomfortable and vulnerable. And here we've got someone who's going to be greatly affected by our decisions. Yeah, I think you're onto something. That sounds like a lot. I have a big family on my mom's side. I just think about them and it's like, yikes. But I love it. I think it's great. I really do. I mean it. My sister and I luckily get along pretty well, and we're dealing with my parents, and my mom's in good health. My dad's a little, he's kicking, but I can't imagine making some of the decisions that I've made, knowing that my sister is either, totally working against me or unable to have difficult conversations with me. And what I'm getting at is that's not the point. So, but I do see a lot of that.
Yeah, it's hard. It makes everything really hard.
Right.
So just a shameless plug.
Please. That's what we're here
what
for.
I'm super excited about is taking all of this relationship stuff, all these dynamics that I've been talking about, and taking that into the workplace
Okay.
and working with business owners to help them understand how their dynamics are impacting how they run their business, the work culture. It seems almost insane, but the dynamics that one person brings into the workplace can, cause a company to have problems with employee retention, productivity issues, all of that stuff. It's the same as a family, right? If you have mom and dad who communicate effectively,
Yep.
resolve conflict well, have good, healthy boundaries, children don't need to know any of it. They flourish.
Yep.
It's the same thing. If you
Have you ever seen the show Billions?
No, but everybody asked me.
Yeah,
In fact, I got Paramount because I need to watch it.
Oh, it's a great show for the record. Probably in my top 3. But yeah, exactly what you're describing exists in that show. And forget the guy. Axe is like the main character's last name, but he has a on-site psychologist, and she does exactly what you're talking about, and it's a good fit.
That's what I'm hoping to do.
So, how many? What's the number as far as employees are concerned? Do you feel like there is a ideal amount that you would, be willing to take on, as far as like if a company's like, hey, I think this would be a good fit. We want to entertain something like this. Is there a number of employees that you feel confident that you could handle? Is there too many? Is there not enough?
So what I'm proposing is to not work with the employees.
I see.
I'm proposing to work with the people at the top. So C-suite.
Gotcha. That's a tall task, because you're dealing with people who are in charge that think
But there's
it's not me, it's them.
There's a lot. Well, isn't that what we've been talking about the whole time?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
How do we get to them?
So that's a challenge.
That is the challenge.
But I think that, again, if you have healthy communication, healthy boundaries at the very top in the
Yeah.
C-suite, it trickles down and the employees feel it. It translates into a positive work culture.
Well, and I like the idea that you're coming from like a psychology background versus like a positive mental attitude or rah-rah kind of vibe. I don't get that feeling from you, and I like that, because a lot of times
I
it's
can
like,
bring it, but
no, you know what I mean. I mean, a lot of times it's like, just wish it into existence,
yeah.
No, I like it. I think the only tough part is, a lot of those people that you're talking about, they've got it all figured out. They don't have a lot of people around them telling them they need to do the work.
If you're doing a good job running a business, it's lonely, right?
I could see that.
Because you can't have friendships with the people that work beneath you.
Yeah.
And so that alone is a reason to do this work.
So to be clear, I mean, the goal would be to getting in front of the person who is running the company, working with that individual with the intention that it would be more of like a top-down, because again, if the culture can shift from the top, then everything kind of falls into place from there.
In individual therapy, this comes up a lot, right? People talk about being unhappy at work.
Mm-hmm.
They're unhappy at work because they're feeling like their wings are being clipped, like they can't, they don't have the autonomy to be their best selves. When I talk to them about how to approach management about that problem, almost everybody says, no, it's just, I think I'm just going to look for another job, because if I go to my manager or my boss, they're going to think I'm a troublemaker or whatever. So after hearing that enough, I thought, well, if I can't help people from the, working from the bottom up, working from the top down might be the way to go.
I like it.
So
Have you, I know that this is something that you are starting. I mean, has this somewhat begun for you? Have you done any of these kind of sessions with some of these individuals, or is this
I
the new?
have run 2 pilot groups.
Okay.
This is going to be a group model, so working with business owners to decrease isolation and address some of the issues. It's true, like you found, the realtors are dealing with the same issues in business as people in trades, and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I've run 2 pilot groups, and I've gotten some really great feedback, and I'm hoping to run a few more.
Knowing what you know, what do you feel what's your hypothesis as to why business owners that seek your services, what's your hypothesis in respect to kind of what the, what did you call it? The golden snitch? Mm-hmm. What's your hypothesis that the golden snitch will be, and I know it will be different for everyone, but if you had to hypothesize, what do you think would be a common golden snitch for a business owner?
For business owners? I think it's what we've been talking about, that if we can make unconscious patterns of behaving conscious, everything starts to click and make sense. Oh, that's why my employees keep leaving, because every time they get to the certain level, I feel threatened and I start acting weird or whatever.
Interesting.
So I think that's it. I think that, like in all relationships at their core are the same.
Yeah.
I got an email yesterday for a workshop, and the whole point of the workshop is that at our core, we all want to know that we matter. And it's a workshop in doing group therapy and how to facilitate that kind of a culture. But if you think about it, that's what we all want.
Yeah.
We want to be seen and valued for our contributions. And if that doesn't happen from the top, then nobody feels recognized, nobody feels valued for their contributions, and they're going to go elsewhere.
Agreed.
So
I like it.
yeah,
I think this will be good. I think there's a lot of people, and especially in the title space. I mean, I can think of a lot of business owners that this would be fitting for. And for me, as I mentioned personally, I've done quite a bit of therapy, but from a business standpoint, I think it's a different way to kind of digest it for some, that it might be almost like killing two birds with one stone.
yeah. The way I'm thinking about it is these groups, they're not really therapy groups, but they're kind of a cross between consultation and mastermind. I've coined a term, which I'm kind of excited about.
Have you patented it yet?
No, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
Okay.
I'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be trademarked.
Or trademarked,
Yeah.
excuse me. I'm not an
That's okay.
attorney.
No, that's okay. Patents are for inventions.
Got it.
But yeah, so coming together and sort of like the consigliere, when there's a problem in the
mafia?
In the mafia.
Yep.
And the heads of all of the different families come together and say, how are we going to solve this problem? That's what I'm hoping to create.
I like it. Well, like I said, I've got the homework for you. You have to watch the show Billions.
I will do that.
I am very confident that in addition to the role that you already play in it, that you'll like the show.
Yeah.
And we have to have you back on sometime. I want to hear more about what you've got going on with the business, because I tell everybody that just like therapy, just like going to the gym, the podcast is very similar to that, where you can't really get the benefit of what the podcast will do for you just coming on and doing one episode. This is the one where we get to know you. We hear a little bit about your business, the equivalency of showing you the weights and going through some of the exercises. But we have to have you back on maybe 30 to 60 days from now and get the updates, find out how things are working, what things aren't working,
Yeah.
and maybe some of the shifts and pivots that you're going to be doing.
This was fun. And I'm just down the street, so
I love it.
yeah, just tell me when.
I will. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
All right.